Hello, my friends. It is I, Sir Ignitus, and allow me to introduce to you today's episode. Welcome to Firestarters.
Once again, welcome back to Firestarters, the channel dedicated to telling you tales of the most extraordinary heroes ever to walk the earth, the saints. Now, in order to introduce today's saint, we're going to travel way back in time. Now, I've covered saints from 1968 with Padre Pio all the way to 1195 with Saint Anthony de Padua. Well, this time we are traveling all the way back to the late 3rd century during the Roman Empire. This particular saint is one of the 14 Holy Helpers, which is a group of 14 saints that were venerated especially in the medieval times for their powerful intercessory prayer during the bubonic plague and during the Crusades. Now, the 14 Holy Helpers were these great early saints like Saint Blaise. Some of you might remember the special mass we go to where we get our throats blessed with the 2 candles. You can thank Saint Blaise for that. Saint George, who is the patron saint of soldiers, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and all these other great early saints. But we are going to focus on this one particular saint. This is the story of the dragon slayer, Saint Margaret of Antioch.
Medieval? Dragon Slayer? Whatever it is, sounds like a party.
Now, before I begin talking about her life, I need to make an important note. And that is that there is some speculation among historians and church authorities as to the validity of the legends of Saint Margaret of Antioch. Her story was declared apocryphal in the year 494 by Pope Gelasius I, and that just means that her story was declared of doubtful authenticity but widely circulated as being true. So she was sort of the medieval urban legend. Here's what we do know. Saint Margaret of Antioch, also known as Saint Marina the Great Martyr in the East, was one of the most venerated saints in the history of the church, as she's one of the 14 Holy Helpers. So it's safe to say that she was real and that she was martyred for her faith. However, some of her stories may have been exaggerated for poetic or inspirational purposes, and it worked as her life stories inspired many conversions to the faith. And she was one of the saints that appeared to St. Joan of Arc. So that's real enough for me. So we're going to talk about her. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. Alright, so St. Margaret of Antioch was born sometime in the late 3rd century, around the year 289, in the Greco-Roman city of Antioch of Pisidia, which is the modern-day city in southern Turkey, Antakya. So just for some geographical perspective, let's take a look at where this is on Google Maps. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's nighttime over there. We can't see anything. Darn it. Alright, so I waited a couple of hours. It's now morning over there in Turkey, so now we can see everything. So let's go scroll to southern Turkey. And, oh hey, there's the Holy Land, by the way. Anyways, so in southern Turkey, almost at the northwestern border of Syria, here is Antakya. Is it zooming in okay? So that was Antioch of Pisidia in the 3rd century, the Greco-Roman city. Now this is the 3rd century in the Roman Empire, and Margaret grew up in a pagan family. But shortly after she was born, her mother died, and her father was a pagan priest, and he was very busy and unable to take care of Margaret easily on his own. So he actually sent her to live with a local woman out in a farmhouse in the country. And little did he know that this woman who became Margaret's caretaker was secretly a Christian. And from the 2nd through the 4th centuries, Christians were being brutally persecuted all across the Roman Empire. And many Christians were cautious about revealing their identity, lest they be tortured or killed. This woman, Margaret's caretaker, however, knew that she could not keep her identity secret, as Christ commanded us in Mark 16:15, "Go into the world and preach the gospel to all creation." And he means all creation, even if it means the fish in the sea. Yes, indubitably. Be patient with those squid, though. You can't expect them to understand anything without inking about it for a really long time. Ow! and from the words of St. Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, to preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. And this woman taught Margaret all about the faith, all about the importance of the gospel and loving Jesus. So as Margaret was under the care of this devout Christian woman, she would become deeply devoted to her faith and eventually decided to be baptized, and later would go so far as to consecrate her virginity to God at a young age. Now I want to pause for a second to make a quick side note. All the saints I've covered so far have had this in common. They've all consecrated their virginity to God. Now, I am not saying this is for everyone. Most of us are called to married life, to family life, and raising children, and that is a beautiful way we can love and honor God. But I am saying that through studying the lives of the saints, you realize that a lot of them consecrated their virginity to God, so it seems to be a pretty effective pathway to holiness. It's not the only pathway to holiness. Holiness just means set apart. So there are many different ways we can consecrate ourselves, or we can set apart parts of our lives for God, whether you are single, married, a priest, religious, a monk, or a nun, etc. Let's get back to the story. Now, Margaret becoming a Christian and consecrating her virginity to God was all unbeknownst to her father. And when she grew to be a teenager and was essentially at an age where she could take care of herself, she moved back into her father's house. And her father noticed that she was not participating in the worshiping of idols or the pagan gods. And this more or less angered him. When he found out that she had been practicing Christianity, he tried all sorts of methods to persuade her against it, such as locking her in her room alone for long periods at a time, not giving her food and water, or even taking away her iPod. Not the iPod! Now I know what you're thinking. They didn't have iPods in the 3rd century. How do you know? It could have been just a person following you around who would play music for you. And personally, I would rather have that than an electronic device. Minstrel, play me some Chinese flute. Okay, now some Tom Petty. She's a good girl, loves her mama, loves Jesus, and America too. Okay, now a little We Will Rock You. Buddy, you're a boy, make a big noise, bigger than the... Anyways, nothing that her father could do would dissuade her from her newfound Christian faith, and he would eventually completely disown her and throw her out of the house. And he sent her to live with her original caretaker, the woman from the farm out in the country. And this woman happily adopted Margaret as her own daughter. So now Margaret has begun a whole new life living with her old caretaker, the woman who taught her Christianity, and now she is Margaret's mother. And she's living this modest farm life, and apparently she was very beautiful, as she attracted the attention of many of the local lads. Let's just say that Margaret's daily routine consisted of rejecting marriage proposals. One day, however, there was a Roman prefect by the name of Olybrius who caught sight of her while she was tending after some sheep, and he thought she was so beautiful that he sent his messenger over to her to give her the message that she is to be his wife. Like, I'm a Roman prefect, you're gonna be my wife, and you can't say no. Now, when the messenger walked over to Margaret to issue the marriage proposal, she just gave her usual reply. Boy, I ain't gonna be no prefect's wife. I got one spouse and his name is Jesus. When the messenger returned to Olybrius with Margaret's response, he was not exactly a happy camper. He had guards sent over to her to bring her to him by force, and he basically told her to give up her faith or else. Margaret remained faithful. She did not relent. She would rather go to prison, be tortured, or even killed rather than renounce her faith or her vow of chastity to God. So Olybrius ordered her immediate imprisonment. Now this is the part where the story of Saint Margaret gets a little bit more poetic and frankly kind of awesome. So an incredible tale of her imprisonment goes that while she was praying, she was embracing a crucifix in the dark dungeon, and the devil appeared in front of her in the form of a great dragon. The dragon rises up in front of Margaret, bends down, opens up its jaws, and chomps down on her and swallows her whole. And the entire time, Margaret is just calmly praying, clutching the crucifix. I'm fine. This is fine. So while inside the dragon, she just kept praying. Suddenly, the crucifix began burning red hot, not to Margaret, but to the belly of the dragon. And it burned the dragon so much that it caused the dragon's stomach to rip open, freeing Margaret from inside the belly of the beast. So real quick, this kind of reminds me of a scene from the Disney Hercules movie where he gets swallowed up by the Hydra monster and everybody thinks he died, and the Hydra monster suddenly starts groaning in pain, and all of a sudden the Hydra gets sliced open by Hercules from the inside and he's defeated the beast, from the inside out. So what I think is interesting is here's Margaret, and she doesn't need the superhuman strength of Hercules. She doesn't need the sword. All she needs to defeat the beast is simply to embrace the cross. Now, all the time Margaret spent in prison did not dissuade her from keeping her faith, and eventually Olybrius just ordered her to be tortured and executed. And methods of her torture included being burned alive at the stake and being boiled in a cauldron of water. But both of these methods proved ineffective, as she was seemingly unscathed, unaffected by this method of torture, and the local eyewitnesses were astounded at this and were instantly converted. Margaret's supernatural ability to resist burning was quite an inconvenience to Olybrius, and at this point the Roman Emperor Diocletian heard about Margaret and her incredible resistance to burning, and he determined that the best way to kill those pesky Christians is to chop their heads off. He figured this out with Saint Philomena a year prior. I just think it's funny. It's kind of like trying to kill a werewolf or a vampire. Like, oh, you gotta stab it with a stake, or you have to shoot it with a silver bullet. Well, kill those Christians, you gotta sever their head. That's the way you get them. Now, the Roman Emperor Diocletian was famous for his great persecution of Christians, called the Diocletianic persecution, that lasted a decade, from 303 to 313. And during this time, he brutally tortured and executed thousands of Christians for refusing to conform to Roman pagan beliefs. Margaret was finally executed and beheaded in the year 304, and she was 15 years old. Something important to note. I mentioned St. Philomena earlier, and the reason I did is because her story is almost identical to St. Margaret's story. She was a teenage girl who consecrated her virginity to God, and she was going to be forced to marry Emperor Diocletian himself, and when she refused, she was tortured and executed. And she had supernatural resistance to torture, just like St. Margaret did. So you have these sort of dual stories of these incredible teenage girls who were martyred for their faith. And it raises this question: why did the Romans feel to brutally torture and execute these girls? If the Roman government is putting people through an arduous trial of imprisonment, torture, and eventual execution, it is because they're trying to prove a point to all witnesses. The prime example of this is the cross. Essentially, the Romans are saying, if you cross us, this is what's going to happen to you. Of course, Christ turned this all around, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, why were the Romans trying to prove this point by making Margaret an example to all eyewitnesses? It is because they felt threatened. Rome, the most powerful nation on the earth at the time, felt threatened by a 15-year-old girl. What does that tell you? It means that you have way more power than you think. But that power comes from the cross. Remember that the Romans would use crucifixion as a way to intimidate people. The irony is that Christ's crucifixion is what turned the cross from a symbol of fear and intimidation into a symbol of hope and life. Not just life, but eternal life. This is why many saints who are martyrs are often depicted in art actually holding their torture devices. They are embracing their own suffering and death, uniting themselves to Christ's suffering and death. St. Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 1 verse 24, I rejoice in my sufferings. And Christ himself told the disciples in Matthew chapter 16, 24 and 25, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. St. Margaret of Antioch knew this about Jesus and did not allow her fear to control her even when faced with the most horrific circumstances. And she converted many souls for her bravery and love of Jesus, exactly the opposite of what the Romans originally wanted. I won, I shot my BB gun, you lost, you ate your applesauce. St. Margaret of Antioch's feast day is on July 20th, and she has more than a few patronages, but we will name a couple of them. She's the patron saint of childbirth, pregnant women, dying people, kidney disease, exiles, falsely accused people. She is a patron saint of England, and she is a patron saint of nurses. She's also one of the 14 holy helpers, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and she's one of the saints that appeared to St. Joan of Arc during her extraordinary visions and consoled her during her execution trial against the English. And I've said it before, saints inspire other saints. So with that being said, let us follow after St. Margaret of Antioch's example and go slay some dragons, man. And we do that by embracing the cross. So that concludes today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. I am praying for you. Please pray for me too. And that's all I got for you. Okay, bye.